If you haven't already, be sure to create your free Doug membership today by clicking on the Doug Hub in the left menu bar to access year-round community content, local meetups, and more. Please welcome our next speaker, April Dunnam. Today, she'll be presenting her session, Streamline and Speed Up PowerApps Development with Components. Please stick around after April's session for a live Q&A.
Everyone, welcome to my session on streamlining and speeding up your PowerApps development with components. My name is April Dunnam, and I'm a principal cloud advocate at Microsoft and a former MVP, and I just love being a part of this community here. So I would first want to start off before we dive into the content and thanking DynamicsCon and Dynamics User Group for having me today and putting on this wonderful event and giving us all a chance to talk about the things we love in no-code, low-code. So thank you so much for having me. So excited to be here. Now let's dive into the topic at hand. So let's talk about first, before we really get into what components are and all of that, like why it's important. So the title of the session is to streamline and speed up your development. So if we take a look at the typical app development timeline, so this is a typical timeline, not necessarily specifically for PowerApps or low-code development, but the traditional software lifecycle. We can see that the main different stages that we have here, like planning, that takes about 2 to 3 weeks. Application design, which is where components would come into play, that whole process of UX and UI typically can take up to 2 to 3 for UX and then 2 to 4 or 3 to 4 for UI design. And then we look at the application development, there's back-end processes that need to happen. That's pretty timely there. But then the front-end development, 6 to 8 weeks. So if we look at these kind of 3 buckets here, UX design, UI design, and front-end development, that takes a significant portion of our development lifecycle for our PowerApps. Now, obviously, these timeframes will be, reduced a little bit for no-code, low-code because it just enables us to build solutions so much faster. But this really shows why it's so important to find ways that we can speed up these kind of front-end development and UX, UI processes. And that's exactly where components can help us when it comes to PowerApps development. So let's look at what is a component. Really simply, it's just a piece of user interface. That's all it is. And we use these to extend the out-of-the-box functionality that we have inside of PowerApps. So we have a lot of controls and widgets and different things that we can do in PowerApps that really enable us to build rich and robust applications, everything from text inputs and galleries and even mixed reality capabilities and all this great stuff. But inevitably, we'll hit a point where there's something in the UI, the UX that just we need that isn't there out of the box, and we need to be able to extend it. And components enable us to do that. Now, there are 2 different flavors of components here. We have used in Canvas and model-driven apps. So we'll touch on the different flavors of components that we can do, but these components can be used both in Canvas and model-driven apps. So how do these speed up development though? So what are they really doing for us? Or pieces of UI that we talked about, but how can it help us make that process go faster? Well, one, we can utilize existing components for UI needs. I'm going to show you here in a bit a ton of existing samples and resources of great components built by Microsoft and community members that you can simply plug and play to extend the user interface of your applications and just make development easier. We can also create custom components. So create those specific pieces of user experience, user interface once, and then use those in multiple places. So it's kind of like being able to, create something once, and then we can have it used in many applications and have a one single point of truth to be able to make any updates as well to that piece of UI, and it flows down into everywhere that we're using it. So it makes updating your UI and your applications faster and easier. Now, I mentioned before that there are 2 different flavors or types of these components that we can do. So the one is called Canvas components. Now, this is very PowerApps maker friendly. So if you have kind of more of a no-code, low-code background and you're using your PowerApps Canvas applications, then we can use the controls and components that we already have inside of Canvas apps and build reusable controls or components based off of that. So it's built right into PowerApps Studio, when you can use PowerFX to do the logic end, and then the existing controls to build something that's customizable and reusable. And these particular types of components only work in Canvas applications. Now, of course, we have the ability to embed Canvas apps inside of model-driven apps now. So in a roundabout way, they can be used inside of model-driven apps in that capacity as well. Now, the other type of component we have, though, is what's called a PCF, or PowerApps Component Framework component. So this is more targeted towards traditional code first or professional developers, whatever you want to call it, because it requires some kind of more traditional code like TypeScript and pro-code tooling to be able to build these components. But what this does is it goes beyond the out-of-the-box capability that we have inside of Canvas apps, and we can create something truly custom and a control. So, before we had things in Canvas apps like the export to PDF capability, we could create a custom component that does that. We can create all kinds of great custom graphs and widgets. And these components work in Canvas apps, model-driven apps, and even Power Pages. So that's the beauty of these. Now today, I'm really going to be focusing on the Canvas components because those are the most universal type maker-friendly components that we can build. But there's lots of great content and samples out there on how to get started with PCF controls if you do have that TypeScript and that kind of knowledge there to build those. And so many amazing community members that have great content on building these PowerApps component framework controls like Scott Duro, Diana Berkelbach, and many, many more. So definitely follow them if you want to get deep dives into how to build these. And I'm sure there's sessions to come on this as well. But we'll be focusing on Canvas apps. So what's an example of a Canvas component that we can build? Well, one is this tab navigator. This is one that I personally use in many of my applications because navigation is that one consistent thing that we need in all of the applications that we build. And oftentimes when we're building apps for our business, we want them to have a consistent look and feel. And this touches on, one of the big benefits of components too, is that it helps us have that consistency in our branding. So we can create a tab interface like this using some components that matches our company branding and that's consistent across every application that we built in PowerApps. So this is the implementation on the left of how the component would look. And then on the right, we have the ability to define different properties about the component that we can fill in, just like the properties we have in our normal controls. So just some more examples of how these components can function, what they look like. Some great examples here, tons of different components baked into a model-driven app in this case. So this shows some of the advanced charting that we can do with components. A lot of these are PCF components in this case. So this gives you an idea for the different flavors of components and how they look. Now, I mentioned that with these components, we have all kinds of resources to get started. We have a bunch of community-driven components that have already been created that you can just plug and play into your applications. One of those resources that you have from a community perspective to get your hands on some of these components is the Power Platform PNP Gallery. So if you go to aka.ms/Power Platform-samples, you'll see all kinds of samples, not just components, but full working PowerApps templates, Power Automate workflows, Power Virtual Agents, all the greatness of the Power Platform and samples there. But I thought we would just look quickly at this site and take a look at some of the examples that we have here. So we're going to open up the Power Platform sample repo by going to aka.ms/Power Platform-samples. And if we go into Power Apps, so behind the scenes, all this is, I'll click on any one of these, is actually a GitHub repo. So here we can see all the great samples that we have here in several different components. So one of the first ones I see here that was submitted last month was a color clock time picker component here. So this was submitted by one of our community members here, Nati. And so we can see this is an example of if we wanted to have a custom time picker widget, because if any of you all have used the date time picker in Canvas applications, we know that from a theming and branding perspective, it's sometimes difficult to work with and leaves a lot to be desired. So that's a really great use case to build your own custom components where you can customize how you pick date and times and have complete control over the look and feel because you're creating and designing that. So this is a great component that you can just plug and play and use in your applications. So an example of how we might use this, if I wanted to try out the samples, we could go here into the solution folder. And these samples typically have an MS app file, which is that Canvas application in this case, because this is a Canvas component file. So we can click on that and go to download. And that will download a copy of the MS app for us. And then we can do kind of the rigmarole here of opening up an existing application so that we can go and open that sample that we just downloaded there of that component. So we'll just open up and quickly close out of this particular app here to see what it looks like. All right, so we'll just allow some permissions there of this application, and then we'll get this component going because hopefully you'll see just how easy it is to get started. So we're going to go over here to our dots, and we're going to go to open, and we'll do a browse and browse to that directory where we just downloaded that clock time picker component. We don't want to save changes to the existing app. We just want to see what this component looks like here. So now we'll see an empty screen. So you'll notice on your screen section here, this is where we build out our applications typically, but you'll see that we have another tab called Components. So this is directly in Canvas applications of the Maker experience where we can go to build these custom Canvas components. So this is the sample that we have here. We have one component called Clock Time Picker. And again, you'll see that this is just a series of different controls that we have out of the box already inside of our Canvas applications. So we have some labels in here. We have different shapes that make this up. Some grouping going on as well, some drop downs. So we just are basically assembling the controls that we already have in Canvas applications in a way to create a specialized, custom controller widget. So if I wanted to use this, what I can do is I can save this component, which a component on the outside just looks like any other Power App, honestly, as you can see here. So I can save this to my environment and publish it. And now that will make it accessible, and I'll have to do sharing and all of that with anyone that might want to use this component in an app that they're building. So now that I've saved and published, we can go back. And now if we go create a new application, so we'll just do a new Canvas app here. And let's do a phone layout. We'll just call this something like clock test just to see how this component works. I'll show how easy it is to actually import one of these components. So again, let's just add some information here. I'll go in and we'll add a table, kind of center that. I'll just call this clock test as well. And now I know I want that time picker functionality. So if I want to utilize this component, all I have to do is click on the plus button. And we'll see an option here for get more components. So there are different ways that we can get these components. Now this way, so you might see this, and I wanted to point this way first because there's two different, it's kind of confusing, different ways that we can import these. So we have the concept of something called a component library. So if we know that we want to build a lot of different Canvas components or PowerApps component framework components, we can centralize those in a library, a collection basically of components. And this is how we would add these. Now in my case, when I downloaded that sample clock app, I didn't have that in the context of a library. It's just kind of a one-off component there. So there's a different way that I would actually import these. So in this case, and we'll circle back to the component library concept in a minute. I just know many people are kind of clicking around in this add section here, and they see that and think that's where they go, and when they're trying to use these samples and don't know exactly where to go. So instead, to use this, we'll go to the Components tab. And see next to New Component, we have these three dots. And this is actually where we can go to import an existing component that we might have downloaded, for example. So I can go to Import, and then now this is going to show all of the different applications that I have, the PowerApps Canvas apps that contain components, and I can import those components in. Alternatively, I didn't even have to go and upload and save that code component. I could have went to Upload File here, and it would have just imported in that particular component into this app. So multiple different ways, roundabout ways that we can go about this. But I'm going to select our clock component app that I saved inside of PowerApps here, and we'll go to import. So that will add an instance of this component into my application that I could then customize to my needs for this particular app. So now that that component is in here, I can utilize it on any of the screens I'm building. So if I go back to the screen tab like I did here and click on the plus icon again, I should see a new custom tab. So once we start importing components into our PowerApps Canvas apps now, we'll get this custom section, and any of these components that we build will show up here. So I can simply add in this clock time picker like I would add in any of my other out-of-the-box controls. And now it's here ready to configure. And so there's my clock picker, and I can click play. And now I have the ability to select the hour, the minutes, drag it around here as well, whatever I want to do and interact with this component. And then click the checkbox to kind of confirm what I picked there. All right, so now let's transition back to the slides a bit, and we'll talk about some other community resources that we have. So that was the Power Platform Samples repo. Check it out for sure. There's a few great component samples there that you can utilize. But the other one that we have as well is a material design component library. So this is actually something also on that PNP site. So Robin from our community and Luis, they built a series of components that match the design style of Google Material Design. So it's just a particular design style that we have, and they have a collection of components here, like banners and checkboxes and all of that, that match that style. So that's another resource that we can utilize, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, so far, these have been Canvas components. Now, if you want to dive into PowerApps Component Framework components and see what's offered there, there is PCF.gallery. Again, another community gallery where we have a ton of those PowerApps Component Framework controls that we can plug and play and download and put in our Power Platform solutions to really extend it beyond what's even possible out of the box. So definitely something to check out. You can see just some examples of things that we can do here, like having custom buttons and badges and side panels and a PayPal button, like whatever you can imagine. There's probably a PCF component in this gallery already for there. And then finally, the other one here that I wanted to make sure to touch on, and we'll show some demos of a couple of these, is the Creator Kit. So this was actually something that some community members like Scott Duro and the PowerCat team put out. And it's a collection of components, so Canvas components and PowerApps Component Framework components that match the Fluent UI design style. So Fluent UI is what's used across the Office apps and Microsoft Teams. So if you really want to match that design style of that and make it seem kind of like integrated into Teams and those other applications, this is a good resource of components for you to download and install, again, to really speed up your development, which is the point here. So that's the link that you would go to install this, just aka.ms/creator kit to download it. But let's go back over to some demos and see how some of these components work, and particularly the Creator Kit there. So we'll exit out of this application. And I already have the Creator Kit installed inside of my environment. So it's a solution file that you'll go to. So just for context, to download that, once you go to that link, you'll go over to your solution section here, import the solution. And what this does is adds one of those component libraries that I was talking about before. So component libraries are good, again, if you want to be able to really have a lot of components and a holistic place to store those. So if we go back to the Apps tab here and select Component Libraries, now you'll see these are all of the different component libraries that I have inside of this particular environment. So they're environment dependent here. Just for context as well, we can go to New Component Library and create any new component library that would surface up and store these different components. Again, this is just basically a Canvas application where we're creating and storing these components in this context. But I've installed this PowerCat component library. So if we open that, now it'll open up the kind of back end of the component library in case we needed to make any tweaks or customizations here. And you can see the different Canvas components in this case that we have available to us as this loads. All right, so now some of the things that we have is a spinner control. Now this is really good if we know we're going to have some long-running processes. So I talk a lot about PowerApps design and how to make sure that we have well-designed and performant applications. And one of the things, the biggest thing that you could do, honestly, is always be communicating to your users. And so something as simple as this, as a loading message, if you know some initial load of information is going to take a while, or a submit will take a while, whatever it is, having a loading message like this show up will go a long way. And this is just an out-of-the-box component that we can plug and play as part of this creator kit to do just that. We also have an expand menu. I personally love this control. I use this one a lot. So if you need some kind of navigation in your Power App, this is a collapsible menu here with the hamburger icon, and it will show, and you can customize it with your own custom links, of course. We have a header control, so you can have a consistent header and footer as well inside of your applications. There's a component for a dialog box. So dialog boxes are fairly simple to build inside of PowerApps, but having it in a consistent UI control here that you can plug and play is really helpful. Same for a search box. We know there's not an out-of-the-box just search box control that we can add. We have to manually create it by adding in text inputs and a magnifying glass icon and all of that. This does that work for us so that we can just reuse and have a consistent look and feel for a search input. Same thing for icons. I like this panel control as well. So if you want to have a user fill out some information after they click a button, you can have kind of a side panel pop up. So the example that's showing here is like maybe a comment or something that would pop up, similar to what we see in model-driven apps, honestly. Like if we click a button and that side panel pops up on the right, we can have that consistent look and feel in our Canvas apps with this component. And then finally, a progress indicator. So this is just a simple bar. And as we go into each of these, you can see how simple some of these components can be. This is just a rectangle control that is being dynamically filled in based off of the progress. So the fill is being changed here. So that's as simple as some of these get. There's not many controls in a lot of these, just providing that consistent place to use these. So again, if we're building an application from scratch, this is going to significantly reduce the time. So if I go back over here, we'll exit out of this component library now that we kind of know what's in here, and we'll create a new application and get a lot of the way there just using some of these Creator Kit components. So we'll go back to our Apps tab, and we'll do a new app, a Canvas application, and we'll choose Tablet this time. And I'll call this Creator Kit Awesomeness, and we'll click Create. All right, so here's our screen here. Now this Creator Kit is part of a component library. So that's the way that we briefly mentioned earlier, where to install those and use those in our apps, we're gonna go to the Plus tab and get more components. So this is going to look at all the different component libraries that we have and surface those up. So the Creator Kit doesn't just include Canvas components though. So one thing I wanted to point out is we have these two tabs at the top. We have Canvas and we have Code. So the code components is where any PowerApps component framework controls that you have installed in your environment will surface up on this tab. So like part of the things that we have, so you see all these that say PowerCat, these are PCF controls as part of that Creator Kit. So we have Fluent Nav, icon, context menus, and things like that. But the ones I want to use is in the Canvas tab. We'll expand out the PowerCat component library, and we'll look at all the options that we have here. Now, in my opinion, if you're going to be really using a lot of components, you probably should always be putting those inside of a component library as a best practice, rather than doing kind of a one-off thing that we looked at in the first example. And one of the reasons is, we can build components and they can have multiple components inside. So if we do it that other way, where we say import components from the Components tab, it's not giving us an option to select which specific components that we want to import if there are multiple. So it's kind of an all or nothing. Also, it's basically creating a copy of the component in the app. It's not storing that in a central repository where we could go make a change and then have that get pushed down to the apps that are consuming it. So it's basically just a way to get a copy of something and use it, but not creating a central source of truth. So think of using a template. If you're using a template in a website development or something like that, people can make changes to that template and it can get pushed onto your application, rather than if you were to go copy the template and just put a version of it inside of your website. There's no dependency on the template itself. So that's kind of the difference here. So that's why these component libraries are so much better, because as you see, as we expand out this PowerCat component library, I have all the different components contained in here, and I can select as many or as few of the components that I want to use inside of my application. So I can simply click on these checkboxes. I'm going to go ahead and just add all of these for now. So if we want to test them out, and then we'll go to import. And again, this is not creating a copy of these components. Those components are still stored in that component library. I have the ability to customize the properties of the component in the application, but if I want to make any big changes, like if our company branding changes, for example, and we need to change the color coding of some of these components and want that to be pushed out in all 200 applications or whatever it might be that we have, we can make that change in the component library, and then we'll get a message that the component's been updated in here and can just automatically update the apps that's using it. All right, so now we have those components added from the PowerCat Creator Kit library there, and you'll see a different section here than we saw last time. So when we imported that component before, we saw a custom section, but when we add component library components, you'll see a section in the Insert tab here that says Library Components. So this is going to show any of the component library things that you have in here, again, that we will just add in as a normal control that we normally would. So if I want to have that header menu and a consistent header in my app, I click on that. We have that beautiful header on the screen. And then on the right-hand side, and we'll touch more on this concept here in a minute as well, we have custom properties. So if I were to go into the insert menu here and add in a text input, we know that for any of these controls that we add that are out of the box, we have this properties panel show up, and we have all of these different properties we can configure. I can change the font size the text input shows. We can change the formatting there, the alignment, all these different things, the visibility with PowerFX. We can do conditional logic and all of that great stuff. So the same thing applies here when we're building components and Canvas components. We can define custom properties for the components that users can configure that make them reusable. So if we were to click on our header Canvas component here, and we see that now it's added in the screen tree view that we have on the left-hand side. These are the different properties that it provides us. So of course, we're able to change the text that displays in the header. So maybe we're creating a timesheet application. We might update the text there. And as soon as I click out of that and update it, there we have that updated with that text. So it's kind of real time as we update these properties, the control gets updated as well. So we can also, there's some few properties that this can do. So if you're using it on a landing page, like we are right now, this option can be disabled, this back button. But if we were to use it, if we were to go add another screen, so we'll add a blank screen, and we might want to use the same control. So go to Library Components and Header. Now we need a way to route back to the home. So we can toggle on this back button visible, and that gives us a back button. So now I can run this application, we can go back to the previous screen. So that's what that option is doing for us. Then we have a left button option that can show or hide here. So if you need some kind of settings icon or menu, you can change the visibility of that as well. And then a right icon as well. Then we have the ability to specify the theme. So this is a really cool way. Is to say maybe in some applications you want to kind of go off from the typical company branding and colors and all of that and tweak it a little bit. So we can simply go into the theme, and it's using a series of properties here and color codes that we can customize and tweak to our needs here. So I can change the primary color, whatever I need to do, and that will update and reflect inside of the component for us. And then just you can explore all the other properties that we have, but you'll see just how easy it is to kind of get an app going now with some of these components. So I know that I have a header menu. We can go back to the library components section. Maybe I know I want some kind of, let's see, we'll do a panel or expand menu. So that might be something we want. So I can drag that slightly below the header if we want. And so this is kind of the default collapsed view of that. And we have different properties as well. So we configure the items that show. It's going to like pre-populate that a little bit with some sample items so you can test out the component. And then we can toggle expand on select and on button select so that as we click on any of these objects, it can expand and all of that. So now we're really getting a lot of the components of an app built for us using these controls alone. So really something valuable that you can add here. Here's an example of that dialog.popup component as well that we have that are all just configurable with the controls. Now, another thing that we have is the material design components that I mentioned that are available in the PnP repo. So if we go to get more components, we have a section here for material design. So some of these options we have some similar to the PowerCat, just a different design style, again, to the Creator Kit. So let's see, let's try this navigation drawer, and then we'll try this slider. And we'll just see what these components look like. Some more functionality, they're in a component library so that we can update them in one place. And we'll go to this new screen here, and we'll click on the plus button. And let's see some of these options. So there's just a different version of a left navigation with a different design style that we can customize and use with all these properties to configure that. And here's an example of a slider as well. If we want to have some kind of custom slider control with different icons and all of that too. So lots in there. Definitely encourage you to download both of these and see and explore ways of how you can use these components inside of your applications to get started. Now with that, let's dive in a little bit more to the ins and outs of components and how they work. So Canvas component basics, again, where they're used to standardize and reuse common elements, right? So headers, footers, menus, dialogues, loading messages, those are all really great use cases for these type of controls. And we briefly looked at, as far as using the controls, the idea of properties. So when we add in a control, we saw that we have a components tab. We can create those custom components there. But the core piece that really make these components useful is the custom properties. So anytime we build a component, we have the ability to create different custom properties. And there's a few main property types. We can have an input property, meaning that we're needing to enable the user to pass data into the component itself and then apply that to the component. But we also have output properties. So a lot of those PowerCat components that you looked at, the Creator Kit components for a navigation menu, for example, those need to have output properties so that we can tell which item in the menu we selected and then pass that back to the screen that we're using it in to be able to do something, perform some kind of action. So those are the main types of property types that we have that we can configure. And we can have multiple of these different types inside of a given component. So with that, let's actually take a look at how we could build our own custom Canvas component from scratch. So we'll go out of this. And again, I really recommend that you do a component library to handle this. So we're going to go and start with that approach as I recommended. So to do this, we'll go to the Apps tab and select Component Libraries and New Component Library. So I call this DynamicsCon library. There we go. And then we'll click Create. This is just going to take us to the edit mode of essentially a Canvas application, and we can start building out some components. So it's going to give a one component for us already, kind of an empty space here for us to build. So first thing to know about these components, we'll see that we have kind of a set width and height of this component. And this might not be ideal for what we're wanting. Maybe we're wanting to optimize or do like a header component like we just saw with the Creator Kit that expands the full width of a tablet optimized screen. So we might want to change this property, this panel size right off the bat. So if we look at the right-hand side, this are the properties for the component itself. So we have the size here, so we can change that to say like maybe 1200 width, so it's a little bit wider. And then maybe we want it to be not as tall, so we can do like a 200 height. And now that'll change the canvas size basically that we have for the component that we're building. And now the other thing that we have on this panel is these are the custom properties. So you want to think through these, what are you wanting this different control to do, and what would you want users to be able to customize? So the first thing that I know I want to do, I want to build a header component that's maybe just slightly different from what we saw in the creator kit. So I'm going to need users to be able to customize the text that shows in the header component. So we might go to new custom property, and then now we can start building out the custom property. So we'll change the display name. So I'll say text to display. And then we have the actual backend name, and then we can put a description now. It's always a good idea to put a description in here as well so that the user consuming your control really knows what's expected and what this input, this property is doing. So this, I'll say, put in the text to display in the header. And these are the property types that I was talking about. So we'll need to specify if this is an input or an output property. In this case, we're passing data into the component, so we want to have that as an input property. And then lastly, we need to define the data type. So properties support multiple different types of data, everything from text, as you would expect, to numbers, dates, even record and table values. So in the example that we looked at of the navigation controls, those properties are expecting table values so that you can pass in a collection of items and have that fill out the navigation. But even image, audio, video, color, and currency. So you want to select the appropriate type for what you're needed to pass in, which in our case is just some text. Now we'll just click create, and we have this new property to customize our header here. Another thing we might want to customize with a header is maybe the background color of the header object. So we can do a new custom property, and I'll call this one background color. And I'll say put in the header background color. This will also be an input property, but we might change this data type to a color instead of a text. So I'll do that and click create. Now that could be like the basic things maybe that we want for a header. Maybe we don't need any buttons or anything like that. Now we need to start actually building out the component now that we have these properties. Now before I do that, we'll see that this first initial component it gave us a very unhelpful name of just component 1. So we'll select on this right off the bat and click on the 3 dots and go to rename. So we'll give this a relevant name because this is the same name that the user will see when they go to import your component. So it's important that you have something relevant here in the naming. So I'll call this, we'll just call it April's header for now. And there we go. So now, just to build out the control, it's just like we're building a Canvas application, except we're making this reusable. So I might insert first a text label. So we have that here, and we'll center that on the screen a bit. We'll kind of make it take the whole width. And we'll just do some manipulation to the size. Maybe we'll make that a little bit bigger. And let's change the font. And then we will change, let's see, the background color here, which we might just change the fill. So maybe we want that to be purple and the text to be white. So we'll change the color of the text. Now, we added some options though. So right now, this is kind of just a hard-coded component. How do I map what we just added onto the screen to the properties that we define that we want users to be able to customize? So there's one more thing that we need to do. So starting with this background color. If we go into the component itself, so I'll have the April's header component selected, we have a default property for that called fill, which is changing the background of the screen. And I can see it's hard-coded to that purple color that I just changed it to. But if I wanted to point to the color of my property instead, I can remove what's in there and type in the name of my component. So April's header. Dot, and now this will get all of the properties, so including the custom properties that I just defined. So I can go here and we'll go to background color, which is the first one. And now that's going to be bound to this property that we have. Now, if you want to default some values, we can do that right here in the properties panel. So if I don't want that to default to black, and maybe I do want it to default to a purple color, I can put in purple as a default value, and now when anyone adds this component in, it'll have that, and then they can change it if they want to. And then we'll just do the same thing for this text. So we'll change this, instead of saying text in quotes, we'll go to April's header dot text to display. And now that's bound to the property and we should be good to go. So let's give this a save. And we'll publish and we'll add it in an app, and then we will have built our very first Canvas component. It just might take a minute to save here, especially since it's a brand new library that we're just publishing. So, and then once that's done, we'll just publish that, and we'll go through the exact same process there that we did with some of the Creator Kit components, adding that in as a library component and adding it into our application and customizing. And it's really as easy as that to get started, bringing value and speeding up your development with these components. And the really cool thing about it too, again, like I mentioned, is the update process. So it's very simple. If I'm using any of these in an application, so say we were using this header from the component library, I can make a change at the component library level, push it down, and we'll just get a message up here that there's an update, and then it's feed it into our application. So lots we can do there for the development and just to really speed it up. So with that, I wanted to make sure that I'm leaving you with some resources to get started. Obviously, the Creator Kit, that's going to help you a lot to speed up your development. Lots of great components that we can utilize. There's that link for that. The PNP samples, the PCF gallery, material design components, all amazing community resources. I also have a few component examples on my GitHub repo, so I included a link to that. On my YouTube channel, I have a few videos that overview some of these components and a good overview as well of the different types of components and how to get started. And Canvas components and PCF, I provided some Learn documentation there if you want to learn more about the ins and outs of those and how to get started building those. So thank you so much. Don't forget to put your questions in the live Q&A because I will answer those immediately after the session. Thanks so much, DynamicsCon, for having me. Enjoy the rest of your event.